Right, so I just finished recording the video, but I realized I probably didn't specify in the video itself that when I'm talking about using Chessable to study, I'm talking specifically for the use of openings, and I'm assuming that you're using a course by some player who's already made the course for you, not making your own course, since I believe that's what the majority of Chessable users are doing. So Chessable has become one of the most popular, if not the most popular tool in recent years for learning chess. And I think that's for good reason, honestly, because it introduced one of, or more innovative way of learning chess involving an SRS or space repetition system, which the chess, I guess, community hadn't really seen before. While I do believe that myself, having used Chessable for a couple of years, it was helpful to some degree, I believe at a certain point it became quite counterproductive, and hence around 5 months ago I just stopped using Chessable altogether. And I'll put an image up, but basically the fundamental idea of an SRS, in case you don't know, is basically that it helps combat what we call the forgetting curve, which basically means, say, like in math class or something, you're sitting down, you're listening to the teacher explain something, you write down a formula. Okay, you might forget that in one day, but if you review it the next day, then it's going to take you like 3 days to forget maybe. And then say after 3 days you review it again, maybe it's going to take you a week to forget. And after a while you keep reviewing it with like lengthening intervals, eventually it's going to take you like a month or two to forget. And while this might sound great in theory that you can learn everything you need to through the SRS and that you can retain all the like information you need to remember and whatnot, I believe as a long-term strategy, it's probably not best, and I'm going to explain several reasons as to why I believe that. So first of all, I think it's important to put into perspective what role the SRS really plays in our ultimate goal of winning a chess game. This is ultimately what we want to achieve, right? And here with SRS, and we have to keep in mind, our goal is to win the game, not to bang out all our chessable knowledge and like show off to our opponent. Like that can be cool and all, I've done that before, but ultimately it very rarely leads to a winning, well, us winning the game like right off the bat. That's very rare that's going to happen. Your opponent has to play some lines just like straight up refuted and just know when to be bad. This probably will give you like a 10% edge on actually winning the game. What doesn't make sense to me is that, at least to like my experience, the way Chessable is set up, it makes it so that it's very easy to spend a lot of time on it because one, like viewing lines on Chessable is easy, and the way they gamify the system makes it so that you feel like you're accomplishing something by doing all these like repetitions and stuff. But in reality, you're just reviewing information that you already have stored in your head. You remember it for longer. You're not actually learning much stuff that's new. So in terms of actually winning chess games, it's not going to help you as much as you would hope it to. Stuff like tactics, strategy, positional chess, improving these areas of the game, this is going to bring you a lot more dividends than this. And for that reason, I recommend that you probably shouldn't be spending any more than like 15 to 20 minutes a day on Chessable. I think that that's tops what you should be spending, and even if it means you can't like complete all reviews, I think that's perfectly fine because once again, at most it's probably gonna like give you a 10% return on like your investment, right? With that in mind though, I don't believe that you necessarily have to give up using Chessable and utilizing the SRS. I think it can be a very beneficial tool, which I myself have utilized. I don't utilize it anymore though, as I said. And I think we can use what's called like the 80-20 rule, right? Basically meaning that 80% of the results will come from 20% of the effort, really. And this is what we really need to focus on. What is the 20% of what we're doing that really brings the most results? In order to get the most from what we're doing in Chessable, I think that we should be focusing on, well, of course, the lines which we're most likely to face in practice, or just generally the most dangerous lines. And there's two ways to go about this. And the first one would be to use a database. And for the majority of people, I recommend just using the Chess database since it's free. You don't need any expensive software like Chessbase. And from there, you can go and look at like average ratings and categorize the games in the database like that, so that you can see what the most popular lines are at your level. The second way to go about things is to play blitz games in the openings that you want to learn. And from there, you can see, through just simply practice, what are the most common opening variations that you face, and additionally to that, which variations in those openings you have a tough time facing, and from there you can go through those variations and focus drilling those in Chessable. I should also note that there will be times in when you go deep enough in the opening that inevitably, even if you followed everything correctly, there's going to be moves that aren't covered there, and that's perfectly fine, that's expected even. And in those situations, you can consult with a database to see if this has happened in other games and what other people have done to deal with that move that your opponent might have played, or maybe no one else has played before, in which case it's probably not that great, and maybe a computer can help you out there to show what you should have played. Alright, so now I just want to show an example of something from my own repertoire, sort of, not exactly, but it's part of a course I own on the Caracan on Chessable. The Caracan's been opening that I've been playing since 2017, so for quite a while. And considering this is a staple of my repertoire, when this course came out in Chessable, I wanted to check it out. And it was by me, it was a lifetime repertoire one. And basically, after this position e5, advanced variation, this is the most critical line of the Caracan at the moment, I believe. He offers bishop f5 and c5. And c5 is a pretty interesting move, it's pretty dynamic, and it came into fashion in the last years. And basically, the critical move here has always been considered to be d takes c5. At lower levels, a lot of people play c3, but this often leads to a better French after something like this, where black gets in light squared bishop outside the pawn chain when they get to play e6, and this is considered to be a good French defense. And then there's this other move, knight f3, which is not very common, and very often when lower-rated players play it, they don't understand that it's good really, because intuitively you wouldn't expect it to be that great, because after c takes d4, white loses a bit of control over the center with their pawns, and traditionally this kind of thing wouldn't be considered to be so great, but because black has spent 2 tempi with the pawn like this, white can kind of get away with it. And in his course, Ngami showed that he dedicated almost 60 variations to this, and because he considered it to be very critical. However, even for me at my level, I barely face this. And for people at low levels, it's maybe they'll face it, but their opponents will rarely actually know what they're doing and play it in a critical way. And so I'm going to go to this tab here, where I'm going to go here and find the chapter dedicated to it. Okay, it's this one. And as you'll see, there was 137 variations in this chapter, quite a lot. And if you follow my suggestions, you're probably not going to be doing all 137 variations. In fact, I would even recommend, I'm going to just find the lines here with knight f3 here. And there's if we scroll down here, there's 40 covering this line with c takes d4, knight takes d4, and then there's another 16, I believe, covering queen takes d4. Okay, 15, my bad, but close enough. And basically what you would do with these variations that you don't want to drill is that you would find this pause button here, and you'd pause it, and you'd just do this for all the variations you don't want to cover. Because once again, as I mentioned, we really want to be getting the most out of our reviews in Chessable, and honestly, these lines in this course was really a standout in terms of they were very complicated lines. There was a lot of detail and effort put into them, but it didn't really make that much sense for me to be reviewing all of these because they simply weren't happening that much in my game. So after a while, you're going to probably have 2 categories of lines which you inevitably have in your Chessable reviews. The first one is going to be lines that you don't really need to review. And this could be for multiple reasons. One, there were 2 for me really that happened. One was that I just found these lines very intuitive, and hence that the moves came very naturally to me, and even if I didn't review this in Chessable, 2 years later, I'd still be able to easily play this over the board or something. The second would be that I actually regularly face this line in blitz and all over the board, and the line once again comes naturally to me because, well, when you face it in a bunch of games, it's naturally going to feel like a more important line to remember, and hence your brain's probably just going to retain it better. The second type of line was kind of a bit weird to explain, and these were often the type of lines which were a lot more obscure, and well, maybe they were critical lines, but the probability of them actually occurring in practice was just very low. And these were lines which were just in general difficult to understand. And I'm not going to say not to review these lines. I think this can be very contingent upon whether it's a critical line in your repertoire or not. Because very often in less critical lines, there's ways to go for less complicated options where you could avoid having to review such complex variations and hence make things a little bit easier on your memory. But if it's in a critical line and one of the main lines of your opening, it's worth investing the time to figure out what's really going on, going through the lines of a computer, a database, making your own files on this line, and asking yourself, like, at various points throughout a variation, like, why is this move being played? Then, like, consulting with an engine, like, when you suggest your move to the engine, it shows you why your move is bad, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. And then it's a lot easier to review with that in mind because you're always wondering, why doesn't that move work? But since you kind of memorize the move, you don't really think about it and you shove that to the side. But then in the real game, you might kind of be a little bit more shaky if you actually reach that position. And elaborating on this, I believe that probably for most of the variations, you should really cap things at around 60 to 70 points like per move that you get correct. And my reasoning for this is by this point the intervals when you're around this score is already going to be like what, a month or something. And if like it takes a month for you to come back to a variation and like you haven't seen it at all and you've been playing like a decent amount of like blitz games, rapid games, whatever you use to get your practice in, and you're not encountering this variation, that's like months on end happening, you should really be considering that, you know, it's probably not worth keeping this variation in the circle of review, and the variations that you do encounter, you're probably familiar with them enough that you don't need to actually review them with the SRS. And that's going to encompass quite a lot of variations, in my opinion, just that alone. And the lines that are difficult to understand, there's going to be a bunch that you should chuck out because they're probably just mental waste, in my opinion. They're not really benefiting you practically. There's going to be some lines which are sharp and that you might actually encounter a fair bit. And those are probably the only real lines that you should be reviewing, like up until like maybe 100 plus points even. Because these lines, like if you don't remember a move, the consequences could be quite fatal, whereas other lines, if you don't remember a move, it's like not the end of the world. Maybe you get a slightly worse position, maybe black equalizes if you're playing with white. It's really not that big of a deal. And this kind of brings me to another thing actually, which I think is important to discuss, is that people think if they don't use Chessable or something, or they don't use an SRS, it's like they're going to forget like all their knowledge or something. That's really not true. If you're keeping up with chess to some degree by just playing practice games, you're inevitably going to be practicing these openings and whatnot and holding on to that information in a more active way than you would be by actually just reviewing these variations with Chessable. Alright, so on a final note, I just wanted to mention something that I thought was important, and I always felt a little bit uncomfortable using Chessable for this very reason, at least in like long term. And it's that theory changes with chess openings. It's not like languages where if you learn a word or the meaning of some sentence, like in 50 years time, the meaning of that word or sentence is most likely going to be the same. Like sometimes words take on new meanings and whatnot, so maybe not, but most likely yes. Whereas with chess, opening theory is changing all the time. And so there's, if you like are drawing one variation for like 5 years in a row, yeah, maybe for like some of that time the variation was holding up and would actually be like advantageous for white, for example, but then like all of a sudden like everyone found out that black can do this and then black's just perfectly fine, maybe even like slightly better or something. And then at that point you're kind of seems weird that you would be dedicating yourself to keep putting in this consistency and effort into reviewing a line which isn't even like up to date really. That just seems weird to me. And you could also argue, this is something I recognize, that for the majority of players, like this constantly evolving theory is this kind of like this like thing that isn't really a big deal. Like theory doesn't even really matter for most people. Like I remember when I hit 1800 FIDE when I was like a bit younger, like 13 or so, my openings were absolute garbage. I would often get worse positions out of the opening of white. The only thing that I had going for me though was that I was decent at tactics and I had some basic positional understanding, but honestly, even that's pushing it a bit. Basically, all I could do was tactics, my openings were garbage, my endgames were garbage. The only thing I could do was tactics. And my point there is that if you're not already, like, I don't know, it's difficult to give an exact rating, probably at the very least 1600 you should be before you're doing any sort of, like, kind of intensive, like, drawing lines in Chessable. I think below that, it just doesn't make sense to even be using Chessable to memorize openings, honestly. But that's just my opinion, of course. So to wrap up, Chessable, it's not bad inherently necessarily. It's all about how you use it. I've used it myself, think I derive some benefit from it. But I just have a feeling there's a lot of people out there who are kind of using it blindly and expecting to get a lot of improvement when in fact you're probably not getting out of it as much as you think you may be. Alright, so thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you liked it, please like the video, subscribe also, and if there's something that you thought I was wrong about or that you want to discuss down below, please leave a comment and I'll get to you soon. Anyways, see you.